Have you ever thought about how ancient humans chose their leaders? We have all seen the classic image in movies, books. In popular culture, a towering, muscular caveman clad in rough animal skins, clutching a massive wooden club. He grunts, beats his chest, and violently knocks down anyone who dares to challenge his authority. In this popular imagination, the leader of the prehistoric tribe is always the biggest, strongest, and most terrifying brute, an alpha male who rules through sheer physical intimidation and the constant threat of violence. It seems like a simple, logical assumption. After all, in a wild, brutal world filled with saber-toothed cats and rival clans, wouldn't you want the most terrifying warrior in charge? Wouldn't physical dominance naturally translate into political power? Yet, when we look closely at the actual evidence left behind by our ancestors, we find that this classic pop culture image is not just an exaggeration, it is a complete evolutionary lie. For roughly 99% of modern human history, spanning nearly 300,000 years of Homo sapiens existence, our ancestors lived in societies that were fiercely, aggressively egalitarian. There were no kings, no permanent chiefs, no lords, and absolutely no hulking brutes ruling by sheer physical terror. If a prehistoric bully tried to act like a modern dictator, he would not find himself sitting on a throne. He would likely find himself abandoned in the wilderness, laughed out of the camp, or quietly executed in his sleep by a coordinated coalition of his peers. To understand how ancient humans actually chose their leaders, we first have to understand the profound evolutionary puzzle of our species. If you look at our closest living primate relatives, chimpanzees, they live in highly rigid coercive and physical dominance hierarchies. In a chimpanzee troop, the alpha male reigns supreme. He controls the best food, monopolizes mating opportunities, and demands submission from every other member of the troop. He maintains this position through explosive displays of physical violence, charging through the forest, ripping up branches, and physically assaulting rivals. If human beings split from a common ancestor, shared with chimpanzees around 6 to 8 million years ago, why didn't we keep this might makes right political system? How did we transition from a species ruled by the strongest beast to a species that actively despised and suppressed bullies? The answer lies in a radical social and technological revolution that completely leveled the evolutionary playing field. When early humans transitioned from living in dense forests to hunting and foraging on the open African savanna, our survival strategy underwent a fundamental shift. We could no longer survive as isolated individuals or small, highly competitive family units. We became obligate cooperative breeders and big game hunters. On the open savanna, a single human is incredibly vulnerable, but a coordinated band of humans, working in absolute unison, is the most lethal force on the planet. To hunt massive animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, or giant bison, humans had to learn to share, communicate, and cooperate on a level never before seen in the animal kingdom. In this new ecological niche, a selfish, arrogant leader who tried to monopolize resources was not a protector. He was a direct threat to the survival of the entire group. But how do you stop a physically massive, aggressive individual from taking over? How does a group of smaller, weaker humans keep a potential tyrant in check? This is where the invention of technology changed the nature of power forever. In a chimpanzee troop, physical size and muscle mass are absolute. A chimp cannot easily harm a dominant alpha male from a distance. Combat is always hand-to-hand, tooth and nail. Because of this, the physically strongest chimp almost always wins. But hundreds of thousands of years ago, early humans invented two revolutionary tools that shattered this biological monopoly on power: projectile weapons and complex language. Think about the profound political impact of a simple wooden throwing spear, like the famous 300,000-year-old Schurningen spears discovered in Germany. The moment humans became capable of throwing a sharpened stick or a heavy stone with lethal accuracy from 20 yards away, physical size lost its absolute advantage. A physically weak, slender individual was now just as deadly as a muscular giant. More importantly, weapons allowed for the coordination of collective lethal force. A massive, Aggressive bully might be able to win a fistfight against any single member of the tribe, but he stood absolutely no chance against 3 or 4 average-sized hunters who decided to stand together. Spears in hand. Weapons became the ultimate physical equalizers. They made everyone in the tribe equally lethal, which meant that trying to rule through physical intimidation became an incredibly dangerous, high-risk strategy. If you tried to bully the group could easily conspire to eliminate you from a safe distance, or simply wait until you fell asleep and drive a spear through your chest. This radical shift in the balance of power led to what the renowned anthropologist Christopher Boehm termed the reverse dominance hierarchy. In a classic dominance hierarchy, like that of chimpanzees or wolves, the strong dominate the weak. But in a reverse dominance hierarchy, which Boehm identified as the universal political structure of nomadic hunter-gatherer societies across the globe, the weak form a permanent, coordinated coalition to dominate the strong. The primary goal of this collective coalition is to ensure that no single individual can ever rise above the rest of the group, monopolize resources, or establish a position of permanent authority. To maintain this absolute egalitarianism, ancient humans did not immediately resort to bloody executions. Instead, they developed a highly sophisticated, step-by-step system of social control, using language as their primary weapon. Long before a potential tyrant could seize power, the tribe would deploy a series of subtle, psychological defenses designed to crush his ego and bring him back down to earth. The first line of defense was gossip. Language did not evolve merely to help us coordinate hunts or warn each other about predators. It evolved as a tool for social mapping. In a small band of 50 to 150 people, everyone knew everyone else's business. If a particular hunter started acting too proud, taking more than his fair share of a kill, or speaking to others in an arrogant, bossy tone, people would immediately start talking behind his back. This gossip was not harmless. Idle chatter, it was a highly coordinated process of building social consensus. Through gossip, the members of the tribe would quietly agree that this individual's behavior was becoming a problem, preparing themselves to act collectively if his ego continued to swell. If gossip failed to curb the individual's arrogance, the tribe would move to the second line of defense, active ridicule and mockery. They would look away, pretend not to hear, or walk in the opposite direction. If he tried to sit by the communal fire, people would quietly stand up and move to another hearth. They would refuse to share their gathered berries or nuts with him, and they would exclude him from the nightly storytelling and rituals. This process of social shunning, or ostracism, was a terrifying psychological punishment for a species that is deeply hardwired for connection. In the harsh, unforgiving wilderness of the Pleistocene, being cut off from the warmth and protection of the group was a slow, agonizing death sentence. Only when all of these psychological and social defenses failed, when an individual became a genuine, violent threat to the safety of the group, perhaps by physically assaulting others, stealing food, or attempting to declare himself the permanent ruler, would the tribe resort to the ultimate, permanent solution, execution, or exile. This was never a spontaneous act of passion. It was a cold, calculated, and collective decision made by the elders of the tribe, often carried out by a close relative of the tyrant to prevent a cycle of revenge killings within the clan. The tyrant would be lured away on a hunt and quietly dispatched, or simply driven out into the wilderness alone, where predators or starvation would quickly finish him off. Through this relentless, highly coordinated enforcement of equality, ancient humans successfully kept the dark specter of tyranny at bay for hundreds of thousands of years. But if ancient humans actively suppressed bullies and refused to allow anyone to hold permanent power, how did they actually make decisions? How did they coordinate hunts, resolve disputes, or navigate crises without a designated leader? To answer this, we have to look at a brilliant psychological framework developed by evolutionary scientists Joseph Henrich and Francisco Gill White, known as the dual evolutionary model of social hierarchy. According to this model, human beings have evolved two entirely different psychological pathways for achieving social status and coordinating. Group action, dominance, and prestige. The dominance pathway is our ancient, primate inherited system. It relies on force, threat, intimidation, and the monopolization of resources. It is a zero-sum game of fear. In a dominance-based system, followers obey the leader not because they want to, but because they have to, because they fear the physical, social, or economic consequences of disobedience. The prestige pathway, however, is a uniquely human, culturally evolved adaptation. It is based not on fear, but on the voluntary, freely conferred allocation of status, respect, and admiration. In a prestige-based system, we look at an individual who possesses incredible skill, wisdom, generosity, or knowledge, and we willingly defer to them. We want to be near them. We want to copy their behaviors. We want to learn their techniques, and we want to hear their opinions. Prestige is a win-win scenario. The prestigious individual receives high social status, respect, and influence, while the followers receive valuable knowledge, protection, and a share of the resources. In the ancient world of our ancestors, leadership was almost entirely based on prestige, and it was highly situational and fluid. There was no single chief who sat at the top of a pyramid, making decisions about every aspect of tribal life. Instead, authority was decentralized and temporary, shifting naturally from one person to another depending on the specific challenge the tribe was facing at any given moment. Imagine a typical day in the life of an ancient human band. In the morning, the tribe decides it is time to hunt a herd of migratory deer. They look to the most skilled tracker, the person who has a prestigious reputation for reading the wind, identifying faint animal tracks, and predicting the movements of the herd. For the duration of the hunt, this tracker is the leader. The other hunters follow his hand signals in absolute silence, deferring to his expertise without question. However, once the hunt is successful and the carcass is brought back to the camp, the tracker's temporary authority immediately dissolves. He does not get to decide how the meat is distributed, nor does he get to claim the best cuts for himself. He returns to being just another equal member of the tribe, sitting on the dirt around the communal fire. Later that evening, a fierce dispute breaks out between two families over the ownership of a beautifully carved stone tool. To resolve this conflict, the tribe does not look to the hunter. Instead, they turn to a wise, elderly woman who has lived through decades of social friction and has a prestigious reputation for fairness, empathy, and deep emotional intelligence. She listens patiently to both sides, tells a story about a similar conflict from her youth, and suggests a compromise. The disputing families willingly accept her judgment, not because she has guards to enforce her will, but because they deeply respect her wisdom. Once the dispute is settled, her active leadership role ends. During the night, a sudden and terrifying storm rolls in, threatening to destroy the camp. The tribe might turn to a shaman or a ritual specialist, someone who possesses prestigious knowledge of the sacred songs, myths, and rituals believed to appease the angry spirits of nature. For those terrifying hours in the dark, the shaman guides the group's actions, leading them in chants and prayers to keep their panic at bay. This is how ancient humans chose their leaders. They didn't choose a single person to rule them. They chose specific, highly targeted expertise for specific, temporary moments. The crown of leadership was a fluid, invisible object, passed from person to person as the environment demanded. The moment the crisis passed, the crown vanished, and the flat, egalitarian circle of the tribe reformed. Power was never allowed to accumulate in one place. It was kept light, temporary, and entirely dependent on the voluntary consent of the group. To understand just how deep this commitment to absolute equality ran, we can look at a famous real-world case study documented by anthropologist Richard Bourchier during his time living with the Jew/Honsi, a hunter-gatherer group in the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. Lee observed a custom that at first seemed incredibly cruel, but was actually a stroke of social genius, a practice known as insulting the meat. In Jew/Honsi society, when a hunter brought down a massive fat, An highly prized animal, a kill that would feed the entire camp for days. He was expected to return to the camp and speak of his achievement with absolute humility. He would sit down quietly, look at the ground, and say that he had merely found a scrawny, worthless beast that was barely worth carrying back. But the real performance began when the rest of the tribe went to retrieve the carcass. Instead of praising the hunter, they would loudly and aggressively insult his kill. They would look at a magnificent, fat antelope and loudly complain that it was nothing but skin and bones, that it was tough and stringy, and that there was no fat on it at all. When Lei, bewildered by this behavior, asked a wise tribal healer named Tommaso why they treated their best hunters with such harsh derision. The healer gave a response that perfectly captures the psychological wisdom of ancient human politics. Tommaso explained that when a young man kills much meat, he comes to think of himself as a chief or a big man, and he begins to think of the rest of the tribe as his servants or inferiors. The tribe cannot accept this. They refuse to allow anyone to boast, because they know that pride is a dangerous poison that eventually leads to violence and tyranny. By speaking of his meat as worthless, they cool his heart and make him gentle. It was a deliberate, culturally enforced ego check, designed to ensure that the hunter's prestige never crossed the line into dominance. In these nomadic, ancestral societies, the ultimate veto power against any aspiring tyrant was not a weapon, but the simple act of walking away. Anthropologists call this fissioning, because hunter-gatherers carried very few possessions, only what they could pack up and carry on their backs, and because they did not own land, they possessed absolute spatial mobility. If a temporary leader, a self-appointed big man, or an aggressive bully began to act too bossy-greedy or overbearing, the followers did not waste their energy fighting him. They did not stage a coup or draft a constitution. They simply waited until the middle of the night, packed up their temporary grass shelters, and walked away. They would split into smaller groups, head in different directions, and join other cooperative bands or start a new camp of their own. Within hours, the aspiring tyrant would wake up to find himself completely alone in the wilderness, ruling over nothing but the dust and the wind. Without followers, his power was an illusion. The exit door of prehistoric society was always wide open, and this freedom to walk away was the single most powerful guarantee of human liberty for hundreds of thousands of years. But then, around 10,000 years ago, everything changed. Human history reached a catastrophic, irreversible turning point, the agricultural revolution. It was a transition that would permanently shatter the egalitarian paradise of our ancestors and lock humanity into the rigid, oppressive hierarchies we see today. The trap of agriculture was slow and seductive. Instead of wandering the landscape in search of wild game and plants, humans figured out how to domesticate crops like wheat, barley, and rice, and animals like sheep and goats. At first, this seemed like an incredible upgrade. It meant more food, more security, and the ability to settle down in one place. Humans began to build permanent, durable homes of stone and mud brick, like those found in the ancient Neolithic settlement of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. They dug irrigation canals, built massive stone walls to protect their fields, and constructed communal granaries to store their harvested grain. But in doing so, they unknowingly locked the exit door behind them. Once a group of humans had invested years of backbreaking labor into clearing fields, building stone houses, and planting crops, they could no longer afford to just pack up and walk away. If a leader became greedy, arrogant, or tyrannical, the followers could no longer use the ancient strategy of fissioning. To walk away from their fields meant abandoning their life support system. It meant starvation. For the first time in human evolution, humans were physically anchored to a specific piece of land. The freedom to walk away had vanished. This sedentary lifestyle created a second, even more dangerous consequence: the accumulation of surplus wealth. In a nomadic hunter-gatherer band, you cannot accumulate wealth because you have to carry everything you own. A rich hunter is a slow hunter, and a slow hunter starves. But in an agricultural society, wealth can be stored. Grain can be kept in granaries for years. And because some plots of land are more fertile than others, and some farmers are more successful or lucky than others, wealth inequality quickly exploded. Ambitious, dominant individuals soon realized that they no longer had to rely on prestige and voluntary respect to laid. If they could monopolize the communal granaries, they could control the survival of everyone else. A wealthy landowner could use his stored surplus grain to hire a group of strong, aggressive men to act as his personal bodyguards and enforcers. For the first time in human history, the physical dominance hierarchy of our chimpanzee ancestors returned with a vengeance, but on a massive, institutionalized scale. The bully with the club was back, but now he had a private army, a crown, and a religious ideology that declared his power was granted by the gods. The archaeological record paints a grim picture of this transition. Yet today, we live in massive, highly stratified societies ruled by powerful, centralized leaders whom we often have never met in person. This psychological conflict is explained by the evolutionary leadership theory, pioneered by evolutionary psychologist Mark Van Vugt. Van Vugt argues that our minds are still equipped with the psychological mechanisms that evolved on the African savanna to solve the coordination problems of small-scale, nomadic hunter-gatherer bands. Our brains are hardwired for groups of about 150 people, a limit known as Dunbar's number. In these ancestral groups, evaluating a potential leader was an intimate, face-to-face process. You knew exactly how brave a hunter was because you saw him face a lion. You knew how wise an elder was because you sat around the fire with them every night. You could easily spot a liar, a coward, or a narcissist. But today, we use these same ancient, Pleistocene-era instincts to select leaders for corporations of hundreds of thousands of employees and nation-states of hundreds of millions of citizens. This creates what scientists call an evolutionary mismatch, a mismatch between the environment our brains evolved in and the environment we live in today. And this mismatch explains some of the most bizarre, destructive behaviors in modern politics and corporate culture. Consider, for instance, why we feel such a deep, visceral, and almost obsessive hatred for arrogant, selfish, or bossy managers. When a corporate boss takes credit for your work, speaks to you in a condescending tone, or hoards the company's profits while cutting your salary, it triggers an ancient, 300,000-year-old alarm bell in your brain. But in the modern office, you cannot simply pack up your desk and walk away to start a new tribe without facing severe financial ruin. You cannot gather your coworkers to execute the CEO. The ancient, adaptive response of reverse dominance is blocked by the rigid structures of modern contract law and economic necessity, leaving us feeling deeply frustrated, stressed, and disempowered. Even more dangerously, this evolutionary mismatch makes us highly susceptible to being manipulated by primitive, physical cues that have absolutely no relevance to modern leadership competence. In the ancestral environment, under conditions of extreme threat, such as an attack by a rival tribe or a predatory beast, ancient humans had to make split-second decisions. In those moments of high-stress crisis, they did not have time to sit in a circle and build consensus. They needed a coordinator who was physically strong, confident, and capable of decisive action. Under threat, our ancestors temporarily suspended their egalitarian rules and looked for individuals who projected physical dominance. To this day, when modern humans feel threatened, anxious, or uncertain whether due to an economic crisis, a pandemic, or geopolitical instability, our ancient, survival-driven brain takes over. We unconsciously search for leaders who display primal cues of physical dominance. Studies in evolutionary psychology consistently show that under stress, voters and employees are significantly more likely to prefer leaders who are tall, have deep, resonant voices, masculine facial features, and project an aura of absolute, unwavering confidence. But here is the catch in the complex, highly interconnected modern world. Physical size, a deep voice, and supreme self-confidence have absolutely zero correlation with intellectual competence, ethical integrity, or strategic wisdom. The tall, Deep-voiced leader is no more capable of navigating a complex global financial crisis or managing a multinational supply chain than a short, quiet one. In fact, the very trait that we often mistake for leadership capability, overweening self-confidence, is frequently a psychological mask for narcissism or psychopathy. We are, in effect, using a software program designed for a small-scale African savanna to select pilots for a modern, high-tech spaceship. We end up electing and promoting charismatic, dominant individuals who look like the warriors of our ancestral past, only to be shocked when they turn out to be corrupt, selfish tyrants who exploit us for their own benefit. How do we bridge this evolutionary chasm? How do we reclaim the wisdom of our ancient ancestors in a world of billions? The key lies in recognizing that we never truly left the Pleistocene. The primal battle between dominance and prestige, between the chimpanzee-style alpha and the human-style prestige leader, is not a matter of ancient history. It is a silent, constant struggle that plays out in every corporate boardroom, every high school classroom, every local community meeting, and every national election booth today. We cannot dismantle the massive, complex societies we have built and return to wandering the wilderness in small bands. But we can actively redesign our modern institutions to align with our evolved psychology. We can create flatter corporate structures that minimize the accumulation of unchecked power. We can implement robust checks and balances, modern, institutionalized versions of insulting the meat to keep the egos of our leaders grounded. We can foster transparent environments where gossip is replaced by constructive, open feedback, and where the freedom to walk away is preserved through strong social safety nets and flexible career mobility. Most importantly, we can educate ourselves to recognize our own evolutionary biases. The next time you find yourself drawn to a political candidate or a corporate leader simply because they are tall, charismatic, and speak with supreme, aggressive confidence, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is your brain reacting to a genuine, prestigious expert who possesses the wisdom to guide us through a modern crisis? Or is it simply falling for the ancient illusion of the alpha brute with a wooden club? By understanding the deep, evolutionary roots of how we choose our leaders, we can finally stop being the helpless victims of our primal instincts. We can learn to look past the empty theater of dominance and actively seek out those who led through genuine prestige, wisdom, and a commitment to the common good. Only then can we honor the true legacy of our ancestors and ensure that the invisible, fluid crown of leadership is placed on the heads of those who truly deserve it, not because they demand our fear, but because they have earned our respect.